My name is Cecily Marchand, and the night my family learned who I really was, I was standing in the middle of my own ballroom, holding a glass of champagne I had not touched, watching my mother's hand shake so badly that the wine inside her flute climbed the rim and slid in the stem and dripped, one slow drop at a time, onto the marble floor of the hotel I owned. She did not know I owned it yet. That was the thing. None of them did. 220 guests were packed into that room in silk and pressed linen, stressed. A string quartet was sawing its way through something bright and Italian in the corner, and every single person there believed I was the lesser daughter, the one who had drifted, the one who had been quietly redirected to the service entrance an hour earlier, like a delivery of iced shrimp. And then the general manager of the Halcyon Hotel crossed the floor in front of all of them, stopped in front of me, gave the smallest bow I have ever seen a grown man give, and said, in a voice pitched to Carrie, "Good evening, ma'am. Is everything to your satisfaction, Miss Marchand? I want you to understand the size of the silence that followed. It was not the silence of a room going quiet. It was the silence of a room realizing that the story it had been told all evening was a lie. Before I take you back to how I ended up at the service door of my own building, let me say one thing, because you are going to need it, to sit with me through the parts that hurt. This is not a story about revenge. I know it might sound like one, but revenge would have meant I still wanted something from them. And by that Saturday, I did not want anything from them at all. I only wanted to stop disappearing. Stay with me, and I will show you the difference, because it is the whole point. Let me go back 9 months. To the afternoon I found out my sister was engaged. I did not find out from a phone call. I did not find out from a text message. I found out the way strangers find out things, from a photograph posted for the world to see. My sister Odile's left hand held up to the light, a diamond the size of a thumbnail catching the sun, and underneath it 3 words in curling script. She said yes. Celebration details soon. I remember I was sitting at my desk with a contractor's estimate open in front of me, and I looked at that ring for a long time, and I felt the old familiar things settle into my chest. Not jealousy, something quieter and older than jealousy. The understanding that whatever was happening in my family, I would always be the last to be told, if I was told at all. 3 days passed before my mother called, not to invite me, to manage me. "Cecily, I assume you saw the news," she said, and her voice had that particular edge she kept sharpened for me, the tone she never used with anyone else. "The party is Saturday at the Halcyon. Wear something appropriate, and please, do not do anything to embarrass your sister." "No, how are you?" "No, we would love to have you there." Just a set of instructions and a warning, the way you might brief a caterer you did not entirely trust. I thought about a Christmas gathering 3 years earlier, when my mother had walked me around a room full of her friends from the Garden Society, her hand light on my shoulder, steering me. "This is Cecily, my younger one," she had said, with a little laugh. "She is still figuring things out. I was 31 years old. I already owned 2 hotels. But she introduced me the way you would introduce a niece who had dropped out of school and moved back into the guest room. Here is the part that matters. She did not know about the hotels. None of them knew. And it was not because I was hiding them. It was because in 34 years, not one of them had ever asked me a single real question about my life. There was nothing to hide. There was only a door no one ever bothered to open. Every family dinner, every holiday, every phone call I could remember bent back toward the same center of gravity, and the center was always Odile. Odile's promotion. Odile's new apartment with the view. Odile's perfect match, Weston Calderwood, of the Calderwood family, the ones with the name that opened doors in this city. And me, I was the weather in the background, present, unremarked, something you did not comment on unless it turned bad. What my mother did not know, what none of them knew, was that 6 months before that phone call I had signed the final papers on the Halcyon Hotel, the grand old jewel box on the loveliest square in Savannah, the exact hotel where my sister was about to throw the most expensive party of her life. I want to be clear, because it matters later. I did not engineer that. When I bought the Halcyon, I did not even know Odile and Weston had gotten serious. I bought it because it was a beautiful, underpriced, badly managed building with good bones and a location that could not be reproduced. And buying beautiful, underpriced, badly managed buildings is what I do. Fate has a sense of humor. It does not always tell you the joke until the punchline is standing in your ballroom. I set my phone down after my mother hung up, and I noticed she had not asked whether I could make it. She had simply assumed I had nothing in my life important enough to compete with a Saturday summons. The favoritism did not begin with the engagement. It began, as far as I can tell, The day I was born, 2 years too late to matter, into a family that had already decided its star. When Odile turned 25, my mother gave her $45,000 toward the down payment on her first apartment. "You are building a life," my mother had said, glowing, pressing the check into her hands. "This is an investment in your future." When I turned 25, I asked my mother for a loan, a real loan, with paperwork, to buy a tired little 12-room inn I had found out near the coast, all peeling paint and good light and potential. My mother laughed at me. "Cecily," she said, "that is not a business plan, that is a daydream. Odile knows how to build something. You just wander." So I went to a bank instead. I took the loan at 19% interest, which is the kind of number that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. doing arithmetic on the ceiling. That first year nearly ended me, but I made it work, and then I bought a second property, and then a third, and no one in my family ever once asked me how. No one noticed the wandering daughter was quietly buying up the coast. When my marriage ended 6 years ago, I made the mistake of calling my mother. My husband Gareth had cheated. I had found out in the worst possible way, and the divorce that followed was long and ugly. And I called my mother because some stubborn, childish part of me still believed that was what mothers were for. Her answer still lives in me. "I warned you, Cecily," she said. "You have never known how to pick people. Odile would never have let this happen to herself." I stopped calling after that. I was not bitter. Exactly. I was tired. There is a specific exhaustion that comes from proving yourself, over and over, to people who decided who you were before you could speak, and who have simply stopped watching the evidence. At some point, you put the exhibit down. You stop trying the case. And that is where I was, steady and quiet and finished with all of it, when the email came in that changed the shape of that Saturday. It was from Lionel Fournier, the general manager of the Halcyon, a man who had run that hotel with beautiful, unshakable discretion for 10 years, long before I ever held the deed. "Miss Marchand," the email read, "I need to make you aware of the engagement booking this Saturday. The client has made several unusual requests regarding guest access. Please advise at your earliest convenience." I opened the attachment, and my chest went tight before I even understood why. It was a guest management document. 3 names had been flagged for what the file politely called alternative entrance routing. The first 2, I gathered, were former business associates of Weston's, people he was in some quiet dispute with, and keeping them out of the lobby made a certain sense. The 3rd name on that list was mine. And next to my name, scanned right into the document in my sister's own looping handwriting, were the instructions. "Cecily Marchand, sister of the bride. Redirect to service entrance if she appears. Do not permit through the main lobby under any circumstances." I read it once, then I read it again, then I read it a 3rd and a 4th time. The way you touch a bruise to confirm it is real. My own sister had put me on a list beside people her fiancé was actively trying to avoid. She had classified me as a problem to be routed, a thing to be kept away from the important guests, the real family, the people who counted. Lionel had added a note at the bottom, and I could feel him choosing his words like stepping stones across a river. "Miss Marchand, I find this request highly irregular given your relationship to the property. Shall I intervene? Please advise." I sat in my office as the light went out of the sky, and I looked out at the city, at the dark shapes of the buildings, at the square where the Halcyon sat glowing, my building, where my sister intended to humiliate me in front of 220 people who would never think to question her version of me. I had options. I turned each one over like a stone. I could cancel the event outright, invoke some clause, and let the whole thing collapse the day before. I could reveal myself in advance and watch Odile scramble to reroute her perfect night. I could simply not go and let them believe, one more time, that they had won by default. But none of those felt right, and I sat with the wrongness of each until I understood it. If I stayed home, I stayed invisible, which was the one thing I was done being. If I made a scene, they would call me dramatic, unstable, exactly the unraveling woman they had always described. But if I walked in and I let the truth arrive on its own, in its own time, with witnesses and paper to back it, then it would not be my word against theirs. It would just be true. I typed my reply to Lionel. "Do not change anything. Let them proceed exactly as they have planned. I will handle this personally." His answer came within a minute. "Understood, Miss Marchand. I will be on standby." I closed my laptop. Saturday, I thought, was going to be an education. Here is my one interruption, and then I promise I will not break the spell again. If you have ever walked into a room full of your own relatives and felt like you were standing behind glass, present but somehow untouchable, unheard, unseen, then you already know exactly how the next part felt. and I would rather you feel it with me than watch it from far away. So stay close. It is about to turn. I called Raphael the next morning. We had been friends since college, back when I was a girl with enormous plans and about $11 to my name. He was my attorney now, but that was almost beside the point. What mattered was that Raphael was the one person on this earth who had watched me build the whole thing from nothing, brick by borrowed brick. They put you on a blacklist, he said, and his voice went sharp with disbelief. At your own hotel. Service entrance, I said, like I am dropping off the linens. Cecily, that is insane. Just call them right now and tell them you own the place. Let them grovel. And then, what's that? I said. I was looking at the ceiling of my apartment. They would apologize because they were frightened, not because they were sorry. Nothing would actually change. I would still be the daughter doll they tolerate, only now, a nervous one. Raphael went quiet for a moment. Then he asked me the question that ended up organizing the entire night. What do you actually want here? He said. Is this revenge, or is it closure? The question hung there in the air of my kitchen. I had asked it of myself 100 times since the email. I do not want revenge, I finally said. And as I said it, I knew it was the truth. I want them to understand that I am not who they have decided I am. I want to stop shrinking myself to fit a space they never actually made for me. That is not nothing, Cecily, he said, more gently. No, I said, it is not. He sighed. If you are really doing this, you need someone in the room. Let me come as your guest. Old college friend, catching up over champagne. And I will bring documentation, just in case someone decides they need proof. That works, I said. He paused. You understand this could go off like a bomb in the middle of their night. I thought about every dinner where my chair might as well have been empty. Every quiet accomplishment that dropped into the family silence without a ripple. Every time my mother's eyes moved across me on their way to something more interesting. I am fine, I said, with not hiding anymore. Whatever they choose to do after that is on them. He agreed to meet me at the Halcyon on Saturday. I hung up and I looked at the dress hanging in my closet. Simple, black, quiet, perfect. Saturday came faster than I wanted it to. By 7 o'clock, the sun had dropped behind the roof lines and painted the front of the Halcyon in amber and old gold. I had chosen my clothes with care, the plain black dress, elegant and unornamented. No jewels, no statement, nothing that asked to be looked at. Only a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, Clementine, the one person in my whole childhood who had ever really looked at me. I could still hear her, the last time she fastened those pearls onto me, when I was small and fizzing with some hurt or another. Real things do not shout, Cecily, she had said, turning me toward the mirror. They just last. I wore her pearls the way another woman might wear armor. The valet recognized my car, but said nothing. I had asked Lionel to keep my presence quiet. As far as the staff on the floor were concerned, I was just another name on the guest list tonight. The main entrance glowed. Through the tall glass doors, I could see the lobby, the chandeliers throwing little rainbows across the marble, guests in evening dress drifting toward the ballroom, laughter, the pale gold shine of champagne. My sister's perfect night, assembling itself exactly as designed. I squared my shoulders and walked toward the front door. That is when he stepped in front of me. A young security guard in a dark suit, an earpiece, a clipboard held against his chest. Professional, polite, simply doing the job he had been handed. Good evening, ma'am, he said. May I have your name? Cecily Marchand. I watched his finger travel down the list and stop. I watched something cross his face, confusion first, then a careful, practiced blankness. I am sorry, ma'am, he said. I will need to direct you to the service entrance. Excuse me, I said. Those are my instructions. The service entrance is around the back, through the kitchen corridor. I did not move. May I ask who gave those instructions? I said. The event organizer. He shifted his weight, unhappy. I am sorry, ma'am. I am only following what I was told. Protocol. My sister had built a protocol for keeping me out of a building I owned. I looked past his shoulder, through the glass, into the warm gold of the lobby, and that is when I saw her. My mother, standing just inside the doors, looking directly at me. Our eyes met across maybe 15 feet of marble and glass. She did not move. She did not wave. She did not come to fix it. She smiled. I knew that smile. I had spent my whole life watching it land on other people. It was the smile she wore when Odile won the award, when Odile graduated at the top, when Odile announced the engagement. The smile of pure, uncut pride. But she had never once aimed it at me, and now that it was pointed my way for the first time, I understood it was not pride at all. It was satisfaction. My mother was watching her younger daughter get turned away from the front door of a party like a vendor who had come to the wrong entrance, and she was pleased. This was not a mix-up. This was not a miscommunication. This was designed, and she wanted a seat for the performance. A little further back, near the mouth of the ballroom, I could see Odile herself, luminous in cream silk, accepting kisses on the cheek from a small crowd. She glanced toward the lobby, toward me, and I caught the flicker of it, the tiny nod of recognition, the confirmation that yes, the machine was working exactly as she had said it. Then she turned back to her admirers and laughed at something one of them said. The guard cleared his throat. "Ma'am," the service entrance. Off to the side, near the concierge desk, a bellhop named Matteo had noticed. He had worked at the Halcyon for 4 years, and his eyes went wide when he saw my face, and he took a step toward me, an instinct kicking in. But the security guard caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of his head, and Matteo stopped and looked at me with something like an apology, and then looked at the floor. I stood there for 5 full seconds. They stretched out like an afternoon. My mother finally broke the stare, turning to greet an arriving couple with warmth and music in her voice, as though nothing at all had happened, as though her daughter had not just been publicly turned out of a doorway while she watched. I could have ended it right there. I could have demanded the manager, named myself, dropped the whole truth on that marble floor, and watched it shatter. But it was not time yet. "Fine," I said quietly. "I will use the service entrance." I turned and walked toward the side of the building, my heels loud on the pavement in the evening, quiet. Let them think, for one more hour, that they had won. The service entrance smelled like industrial soap and fresh bread. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, a hard and honest light after the chandeliers. I pushed through the heavy steel door, into the kitchen corridor, into the beautiful controlled violence of a 5-star kitchen at full throttle. Steam rising off a dozen pans, stainless steel running away in every direction. And then, one by one, it stopped. A prep cook froze mid-slice. A server carrying a full tray of flutes went rigid. The head chef, a compact and ferocious man named Laurent, who had been snapping orders across the line, went completely still. "Miss Marchand," he said, barely above a whisper, "we were not told you would be." "It is all right, chef," I said. "Please carry on." No one moved, and I understood, looking at their faces, that they had all seen the guest list. They knew my name was on it. They knew exactly which door I had been sent to, and why, and what it meant that I had come through theirs. "Really," I said, keeping my voice level and light. "Tonight I am only a guest. Please carry on." Chef Laurent nodded slowly. "The scallops are exceptional tonight, Miss Marchand," he said, and there was something almost fierce in how he said it. "My own preparation." "I am sure they are perfect," I said. The kitchen came back to life around me as I walked through it, though I could feel every eye tracking me the length of the room. A dishwasher nearly dropped an entire rack of glasses. A pastry chef murmured something to the woman beside her. I reached the service door that opened onto the back corridor of the ballroom, and through the little window I could see it all. The chandeliers, the elegant crowd, my sister at the burning center of it, with Weston's arm around her waist. 220 people celebrating the perfect life of the perfect daughter. I let myself smile, just a little, not bitter, not angry, patient. I smoothed the front of my dress, took a breath, and pushed through the door into my own ballroom. It was breathtaking. Even knowing every inch of that room, even having personally approved the budget that restored it, seeing it dressed for a party took the air out of me. Tables draped in gold surrounded a central floor. The quartet played in the corner, behind the head table in tall, elegant script. A backdrop read O&W, forever, $92,000. I knew the number precisely, because the invoice had crossed my desk before it crossed anyone else's. My phone buzzed against my palm. Raphael. In position, the message read, "Bar, far, corner. I have what you asked me to bring." "Hold for now," I typed back. "I want to see how far they will go." "Understood," he wrote. "But do not wait too long, Cecily. You deserve to be seen." I slid the phone back into my clutch and read the room. My mother was holding court near the gift table, accepting compliments on her daughter's behalf like a queen accepting tribute. Odile drifted between clusters of guests, Weston dutifully at her elbow. No one had noticed me. I had come in through a side door in a plain black dress, no name announced ahead of me, and I had folded myself into the wall, invisible, exactly the way they wanted me. There is a strange thing that happens when you have spent your whole life being overlooked. You get very, very good at not being seen. I had turned my great family wound into a skill, and tonight I was going to use it. I spotted Lionel across the room, and our eyes met for a second. He began to move toward me on instinct, the reflex of a man checking whether his employer needs anything, and I gave the smallest shake of my head. He stopped, understood, and retreated to his post near the service corridor. A few feet from me, my mother was cataloging Odil's virtues for a knot of listeners. Top of her class, she was saying. The Calderwoods were so impressed. You know they do not simply welcome anyone. Her champagne tilted a little as she gestured. We are so blessed. Odile has always known exactly what she wants. I took a glass from a passing tray and found a pocket of shadow near a column. The night was young. I could see Lionel struggling, even from across the room. The way his gaze kept flicking to me, then to my sister, then back. 10 years, he had run that hotel on discretion, and discretion was being tested tonight in a way it had never been tested. Once he crossed the floor toward Odile's group, offering, I assumed, to check on some catering detail. I watched my sister wave him off, without so much as looking at him, too deep, in conversation with one of Weston's aunts to acknowledge a member of the staff. When he finally found a reason to pass near my corner, he leaned in without breaking stride. Miss Marchand, he said low. This is deeply irregular. Say the word and I can. Not yet, I said. But ma'am, what they did. I know what they did, Lionel. I also know exactly what I am doing. He hesitated, his professionalism at war with something more personal. The kitchen staff are upset, he said. Word travels. Tell them I am grateful for their discretion, I said. And Lionel, I caught his eye. When I need you, you will know. Until then, treat me like any other guest. That is the one thing I cannot do, ma'am, she said quietly. Then treat me, I said, like a guest who happens to own the building. Something crossed his face, respect maybe, and he gave me one small nod and continued his rounds. From across the room, my mother had noticed Lionel speaking to someone in the shadows. Her eyes narrowed, trying to place the figure. I drifted a step behind a tall arrangement of white flowers, and she gave up, shrugged, and returned to her admirers. Just another anonymous guest. No one worth the effort of looking twice. I checked the time. The toasts would begin soon. Odile would take the little stage and stand in the light and say something about family and love and gratitude. I wondered whether she would mention me. I already knew the answer. The sound of a fork against crystal cut through the room. Everyone, if I could have your attention, Weston said, his voice carrying easily. My beautiful bride-to-be would like to say a few words. Applause rolled through the crowd. Odile floated up to the small stage, every inch the radiant fiancée, her dress catching the light of the chandeliers, her smile a thing she had clearly rehearsed in a mirror. Thank you all so much for being here tonight, she said, warm and certain. This means the whole world to Weston and me. She moved into her thank yous. The Calderwood family, Weston's business partners, her friends who had flown in from 3 time zones away, and of course, she said, my incredible mother. She lifted a hand toward our mother, who raised her glass with a theatrical, practiced humility. Mom, Odile said, you have been my rock, my compass. Everything I am is because of you. More applause. My mother dabbed at the corner of one dry eye. I stood frozen in my corner and I waited. I also want to thank everyone who made the effort to be here tonight, Odile went on, and her gaze swept the room in a way that managed to include everyone while seeing no one. Family is about showing up, and I am so grateful for the people who truly understand what that means. Her eyes found mine for less than a second, then slid away. Some of us, she said with a small sympathetic tilt of her head, have had to overcome certain personal challenges just to be in this room tonight. A pause. Let us just say that not everyone in my family has understood the value of commitment. But tonight is not about that. Tonight is about real love, a ripple of uncomfortable laughter. A few guests traded glances. At the head table, an older woman with a still sharp face frowned very slightly. I felt the words land like thrown stones. My divorce. She was talking about my divorce, in front of 220 people, in front of the entire family her fiancé came from. My hand tightened around my glass, and still, I did not move. Odile finished to enthusiastic applause, and before the noise had even died, my mother was rising from her seat. If I may add just a few words, she said, and she did not wait for permission. It was because Camilla Marchand had never in her life waited for permission. When Odile was born, she said, her voice carrying without effort, I knew she was special. Some children, you simply know. You can see the whole bright road of their life stretched out in front of them. She paused for effect, and several guests nodded along on cue. Raising a daughter like Odile has been the great joy of my life, watching her graduate at the top, watching her build her career, and now watching her join one of the most respected families in this city. She lifted her glass toward the Calderwoods. To your wonderful son, and to the extraordinary woman he has chosen. Here, here, someone called. As she sat, a woman at a nearby table leaned toward her companion, and her voice carried farther than she meant it to. I thought there were 2 daughters, she said. A small hush opened up. My mother heard it. I watched her spine stiffen half an inch before she turned with a smooth, ready smile. Odile is my pride, she said lightly. Cecily is still finding herself. The dismissal sat there in the air. A few guests shifted. Someone coughed into the quiet. Near the bar, I saw Raphael's jaw go tight, and he caught my eye across the room, a question in it. I gave a small shake of my head. Not yet, but someone else had caught the exchange. The older woman with the sharp, still face, the one at the head table, was watching my mother with an expression I could not quite name. Then her gaze lifted and moved across the room, searching, and it landed on me. And it stayed. For a long moment, we looked at each other across all those tables. Her eyes were quick and assessing. The eyes of a woman who read people for a living and was rarely wrong. She did not look away. Neither did I. I did not yet know her name was Cornelia Calderwood, or that she was about to become the most important person in that room, besides me. Odile found me 20 minutes later. I had been nursed in the same glass of champagne, watching the party from my corner, and evidently I had not been invisible enough after all. "Oh," she said, stopping in front of me, surprise flashing before she smoothed it over. "You actually came. Congratulations on the engagement, Odile," I said. "Thank you." Her smile was thin. "I thought this kind of thing might be a bit much for you. These events can be overwhelming for some people." "I am managing," I said. Behind her, 3 of her friends had arranged themselves into a loose half circle. An audience. Witnesses. Odile tilted her head. "You know," she said, "the Calderwoods are very traditional. They value success, achievement. I hope you understand why we had to be a little selective about the entrance arrangements." "I understand perfectly," I said. "Good." She sipped her champagne and watched me over the rim of the glass. "Because tonight is about me, Cecily. My engagement. My celebration. Try not to make it about your situation." "I would not dream of it," I said. "Wonderful." Another thin smile. "And maybe next time, consider wearing something a bit more festive. Black is so dreary for a celebration." One of her friends giggled on cue. She turned to rejoin her circle, dismissing me as easily as she would dismiss a passing waiter. Then she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "By the way," she said, "how did you even get in? I specifically told security to." She stopped, but not fast enough. "You specifically told them what, Odile?" I said. Her cheeks went pink. "Nothing. Forget it. I used the service entrance," I said, as requested. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Not guilt. Odile did not really do guilt. Something closer to surprise, as if she had not actually expected me to comply, as if she had been half hoping I would make the scene that would prove her right about me. Just past her shoulder, I noticed Weston standing near enough to have heard the whole thing. His expression was troubled. Odile did not see it, but I did. I filed it away, because a man who hears a cruelty and says nothing has still made a choice, and I would come back to that choice later. My mother appeared as if she had been summoned by name. "Cecily," she said, low and sharp, a word. She steered me by the elbow toward an alcove near the service corridor, away from the main crowd but not out of sight. Still public enough that I could not object without an audience. She had always been good at that, at choosing the exact spot where I could be scolded but not defended. "What are you doing here?" she said. "Attending my sister's engagement party," I said. "Do not be smart with me." She glanced around to be sure no one important was watching. "You know exactly what I mean. After everything, you simply show up." "Was I not invited?" I said. Her jaw tightened. "This is Odile's night. Do not ruin it." "I have not done anything, Mom." "Good. Keep it that way." She looked at my dress with open disappointment. "Could you not at least have worn something nicer?" she said. "Something that shows you made an effort. The Calderwoods are watching. I will not have you embarrass us." And something inside me turned quietly, like a lock finding its key. "Us," I repeated. "Who is us, exactly?" "Do not start, Cecily. Not tonight." And before I could answer, Lionel appeared at the edge of my vision, his face arranged into perfect neutrality, though I could read the tension in his shoulders like a headline. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, his voice formal and smooth. "We have a situation with the catering that requires immediate attention." My mother barely glanced at him. "Handle it yourself," she said. "We are in the middle of something." "I am afraid I need authorization," Lionel said, and he paused, and chose the next words like a man stepping onto ice. "From management." "Then go find management," my mother snapped. "Can you not see I am speaking with my daughter?" Lionel did not move. His eyes found mine and held them. "Miss Marchand," he said slowly, "may I have a word?" My mother went still. Her gaze traveled from Lionel to me and back again. "Miss Marchand," she repeated, and the words came out uncertain, as if she had never heard my name attached to that kind of address before, because she never had. The world seemed to hold its breath. And here we are, back where we started, in the middle of my own ballroom, with a general manager standing in front of me and a whole family about to have the floor come out from under them. Lionel did not flinch. "Miss Marchand," he said, "we have an issue with the seafood delivery. The scallops arrived with quality concerns. As the owner, I need your authorization to substitute the reserve from our cold store." The word dropped into the room like a stone, into still water. "Owner." My mother's face went slack. Her champagne flute tilted in her grip, and I watched the wine climb toward the rim. "I am sorry," said Odile, appearing out of nowhere, her voice suddenly high and thin. "What did you just call her?" Lionel turned with the calm of a man who had served senators and difficult heiresses and seen every kind of scene a ballroom could produce. "I addressed Miss Cecily Marchand," he said, "the owner of the Halcyon Hotel. Is there a problem?" Silence. Complete, total silence. Around us, the conversations died one by one. Nearby guests turned to look. The quartet played on, oblivious, their bright Italian melody suddenly obscene against the frozen tableau. I kept my voice level. "The reserve will be fine, Lionel," I said. "Tell Chef Laurent to adjust the sauce to match. The citrus reduction, I think, rather than the herb." "An excellent choice, ma'am," Lionel said, and he inclined his head, a small bow nearly invisible. "I will inform the kitchen at once." He turned and walked away, and the click of his shoes on the marble was the only sound in that whole enormous room. I turned back to my mother and my sister. My mother's mouth opened, closed, opened again, and no sound came out of it. Odile had gone pale under her careful makeup, and her hand was clamped around Weston's arm so hard that her knuckles had gone white. "The owner," Weston said, barely a whisper. "Odile, did you know?" "No," Odile said, and her voice cracked down the middle. "No, that is not. She does not." Somewhere behind me, a champagne glass hit the floor and shattered. Someone gasped, and for the first time in 34 years, my entire family was looking directly at me. "This is a joke," Odile said, too loud, panic fraying the edges of it. "Some kind of sick joke. She does not own anything." Whispers moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Guests leaned toward one another, eyebrows climbing, and here and there a phone slid quietly out of a pocket or a clutch. "I have owned the Halcyon for 6 months, Odile," I said, keeping my voice conversational, almost kind. "You are welcome to check the county property records if you like. They are public." 6 months, my mother said, finding her voice at last. "That is impossible. We would have known. Someone would have told us." "Who would have told you, Mom?" I said. "You have never once asked me what I do. You have never asked about my life at all." Her face cycled through it, the shock, the confusion, something that might, for one instant, have been shame, before it set into the familiar shape of defense. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You are making this up to ruin your sister's night." "I am not making anything up," I said, "and I am not trying to ruin anything." "Then what is this?" Odile said, gesturing wildly at the ballroom, her voice climbing. "Some kind of power play. You wait until my engagement to announce that you own the hotel. How petty can you possibly be?" "I did not plan this." "Odile," I said, "I bought this hotel because it was a good building at a fair price. You chose to have your party here, and you chose to put my name on a list." The word list landed hard. I saw several guests exchange looks, and that is when the older woman rose from the head table and began walking toward us. Unhurried, deliberate, the walk of a woman who had not rushed for anything in decades, because the world had always been willing to wait for her. "I am sorry," she said, and her voice cut cleanly through the murmuring. "Did I understand that correctly? You own this hotel." Every eye in the room turned to me. "Yes, Mrs. Calderwood," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. The silence that followed was a live thing. Cornelia Calderwood had the kind of face that revealed nothing, unless she chose to let it, and right now she was choosing to let it reveal disappointment. And she was aiming it, precisely, at my mother. "Camilla," she said, silk laid over steel, "you told me your family was modest. You told me Cecily was struggling. Finding herself, I believe, were your exact words." My mother's composure came apart at the seams. She said, "I did not know." "You did not know your own daughter owned one of the most celebrated boutique hotels in this state," Cornelia said, and one eyebrow rose perhaps a single millimeter. "She never told us," my mother said. "I find that very difficult to believe," Cornelia said. She turned to study me with fresh eyes. "The Halcyon has been written up in Southern Living and Condé Nast Traveler. The acquisition was covered on the business page of the Morning News." Murmurs swept the crowd, and now several guests were openly on their phones, thumbs moving, searching for the truth of it. Odile stepped forward, desperate. "This does not change anything," she said. "She probably inherited it, or married into it." "I did not inherit anything," I said, keeping my voice even. "And my ex-husband is a freelance photographer who could not cover the rent on the honeymoon suite. I built this myself, starting with a 12-room inn 9 years ago. on a loan at 19% that nearly killed me. Impressive, Cornelia said, and her tone made it clear that this was not a casual compliment. She turned to Weston. You told me, she said, that you had done your diligence on this family. Weston's face had gone gray. He said. Odile told me her sister was. Was what? I said quietly. He could not meet my eyes. Cornelia turned back to my mother. Let me be certain I understand, she said. Your daughter, this daughter, is a successful businesswoman who owns the very building we are standing in, and you had her routed to the service entrance like the fish delivery. My mother opened her mouth and closed it. Perhaps, Cornelia said, and her voice carried without any effort at all. We ought to have a longer conversation about diligence. And she was no longer speaking to my mother. She was speaking to Weston. Prove it, Odile said, her voice ragged now, stripped of every ounce of its earlier polish. Anyone can claim to own something. Show us proof. I do not need to prove anything to you, Odile, I said. Of course you do not, she said, because you cannot, because this is all. I would appreciate verification, Cornelia Calderwood said, cutting through her like a scalpel through paper. This is a significant claim, and under the circumstances, she let the rest hang, and Raphael was there at my shoulder. I had not seen him cross the room. I happened to have the relevant documentation, he said, crisp and unbothered. Raphael Ortega, Miss Marchand's attorney. Given the unusual guest access arrangements this evening, I thought it prudent to carry copies. He produced a slim leather folder from inside his jacket. Copies, not the originals. The originals were locked in a fireproof box in an office 2 floors above us, exactly where they belonged. And he had brought the copies precisely because you never hand your only proof to a room full of people who would like it to disappear. Inside the folder were the acquisition papers, the recorded deed, the business registration. Cornelia took it. Her eyes moved down the pages with the practiced speed of a woman who had read 10,000 contracts. The crowd pressed in, straining to see. The Halcyon Hotel, she read aloud, her voice carrying. Acquired 6 months ago. Full ownership transferred to Cecily Ann Marchand. No outstanding debt, no partners. Sole proprietor. She looked up and fixed my mother with a gaze that could have frozen the champagne in its bottles. And you had her use the service entrance. My mother had shrunk somehow, all her earlier grandeur leaking out of her. Beside her, Odile looked as though she might actually be ill. I did not know, my mother whispered. How could I possibly have known? By asking, I said quietly, by calling, by being interested in my life even one single time in the last 10 years. The words were not angry. They were not even bitter. They were just true, and somehow that made them land harder than any shout could have. Cornelia handed the folder back to Raphael, her decision plainly made, and turned to Weston. We need to talk, she said. Now, let me stop here for one breath, because this is the moment people always ask me about. They want to know whether it felt good. It did not feel good, exactly. It felt like setting down something I had been carrying. So long I had forgotten it had weight. And that is a different thing than triumph. Hold on to that, because it is coming back. Cornelia led Weston to a quiet corner, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. Around us the party had fractured. Some guests pretended to resume their conversations while stealing glances our way. Others made no pretense at all, watching the way people watch a match at center court. My mother grabbed my arm. Cecily, please, she said, and her voice had lost every scrap of its authority. You are embarrassing us. Stop this. I gently removed her hand from my arm. No, Mom, I said. You embarrassed yourselves. I just showed up. So what now? Odile said, her careful face beginning to smear, the mascara giving way. Are you going to cancel the party? Ruin the whole thing out of spite? I am not going to do anything, Odile, I said. The party will go on. Your engagement is your business, not mine. My mother stared at me, bewildered. Then what do you want? She said. What is this about? And there it was, the question that had been sitting under the whole evening. What did I want? Not revenge. Revenge would have meant I still cared what they thought of me. Not an apology either. Words were never going to unmake 30 years. I want you to understand one thing, I said, and I looked at both of them. My mother and my sister, the 2 people who had spent my entire life looking straight through me. I am not here to prove I am better than you. I am here because you decided I was less. And I am finished agreeing with you. Cecily, my mother started. I am not angry, I said, and I meant it. I am just done pretending. I paused, and I chose the next words the way you choose where to set your weight on a ladder. You put me on a blacklist at my own sister's party, in my own hotel, and you smiled when they turned me away at the door. Her face crumpled. When you are ready to have an honest conversation about why you have treated me like this for 30 years, I will be here. But I will not be invisible anymore. Not for you. Not for anyone. For once, neither of them had anything to say. Cornelia Calderwood came back from her corner conference with Weston trailing a step behind her, wearing the expression of a man who has just been handed news he will be absorbing for weeks. "Mrs. Marchand," Cornelia said to my mother, with the gracious smiles of a woman delivering a verdict, "this has been a most illuminating evening." My mother tried to rally. "Mrs. Calderwood, I assure you, this changes nothing between Odile and Weston." "I am afraid that is not your decision to make," Cornelia said, and the smile never wavered. "It seems we were given an incomplete picture of this family. You will understand that we will need to have some longer conversations with Weston about his choices." "What does that mean?" my mother said. "It means exactly what I said," Cornelia answered, and her pleasantness was utterly without mercy. "We Calderwoods are thorough people. We do not build our futures on partial information." My mother's face drained of what color it had left. Then Cornelia turned to me, and something in her expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The dismissal was gone. In its place was something like recognition, one builder acknowledging another. "Miss Marchand," she said, "I apologize for any misunderstanding this evening." She produced a card from her clutch. "If you are ever inclined to discuss business or simply to have lunch, I would welcome it." I took the card. "Thank you, Mrs. Calderwood." "Please," she said, "call me Cornelia." She leaned in and lowered her voice. "I always prefer to know who the genuinely interesting people in a room are. It seems tonight I was looking in entirely the wrong direction." And with that she glided off to collect her husband. Odile stood frozen, watching her future mother-in-law walk away. The engagement was not called off that night, but something had changed permanently, and every person in that room could feel it. I found Raphael near the bar. He raised an eyebrow. "You all right?" he said. "I think so," I said. "That was." "I have watched some courtrooms, Cecily," he said, half laughing, shaking his head. "That was something else." "I am going to go," I said, looking around the ballroom. The whole mood of the party had curdled, the laughter gone nervous and thin, guests inventing reasons to leave early. I said what I came to say. "Want company?" he said. "No," I said. "I need the walk." I crossed to my mother and my sister one last time. They were standing together near a column, isolated now, no guests near them. People had started to give them a wide berth. "I am leaving," I said. My mother looked up, her eyes rimmed red. "Cecily," she said. "Not because I am running," I said. "Because I said what I needed to say." I did not. She started, then stopped, then tried again. I only wanted Odile to shine. I wanted the Calderwoods to be impressed. I was trying to help her. "I know, Mom," I said, and my voice was gentle but did not bend. "But you did not have to dim me to make her brighter." The words landed. I watched them hit. Odile said nothing at all. For once, she had no clever answer, no deflection, no counterattack. She just stood there, streaked and silent. I turned and walked toward the main entrance. The front doors, the ones I had been refused at hours before. No one stopped me. The staff I passed gave me small nods. At the door, Matteo the bellhop stepped ahead of me and pulled it open, and there was something in the gesture that was almost an apology, and almost a salute. "Good evening, Miss Marchand," he said. "Good evening, Matteo," I said, and I stepped out into the night. The air was cool and clean after the pressurized heat of that ballroom. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing, my grandmother's pearls cool against my neck. Real things do not shout, I thought. They just last, and then I started to walk. Behind me, the party went on without me, and for the first time in my life, being left out of the room did not feel like disappearing. It felt like being let out of a cage. I woke the next morning to 14 missed calls from my mother. I did not listen to the voicemails. I already knew the shape of them, some blend of accusation and justification and manufactured injury, the family specialty. There were 3 texts from Odile stacked on my screen. The first, "How could you do this to me?" The second, an hour later, "We need to talk." The third, sent at 3 in the morning, was nothing at all, just the little animated dots that mean someone is typing, captured in a screenshot she had somehow sent by accident, or on purpose, I never found out which. She had started to write something and given up. Raphael called at 10 with the update I had been expecting. "The Calderwoods had a family meeting this morning," he said. "My contact at their firm says Weston was in that room for 3 hours. The engagement is still on. For now, a pause, but the prenuptial agreement is being completely rewritten." Cornelia was not pleased with how things had been represented. I poured myself coffee and watched the steam rise. "What does rewritten mean?" I asked. "It means Odile no longer has the access to Calderwood assets she was promised," he said. "They are adding conditions, a great many of them." I thought about my sister, who had spent her entire life optimizing for exactly this catch, and who had finally landed her prize only to watch the terms rewrite themselves overnight. She is still marrying him, I said. Apparently so, Raphael said. Weston seems committed, though his mother is making him attend what she is calling family alignment sessions before the wedding. He paused. I do not know what those are, but they do not sound like fun. I almost felt sorry for Odile. Almost. There is one more thing, Raphael said. 3 guests from last night have already called the Halcyon this morning. They want to book events. Really? I said. Apparently watching you handle that impressed some people, he said. One woman told the concierge, and I am quoting her, that anyone who could stay that composed under that kind of pressure was someone she wanted to do business with. I laughed, in spite of myself. My family had set out to humiliate me in front of 220 people, and instead they had advertised my composure to a ballroom full of potential clients. You did good last night, Raphael said more quietly. You know that, I know, I said. But knowing did not make the 14 missed calls disappear. On the 15th call, I answered. Cecily, my mother said, and her voice was wrecked, the voice of someone who had been crying, or shouting, or both. Finally, I have been trying to reach you all morning. I know, I said. You have ruined everything, she said, and the words came out in a rush. The Calderwoods are questioning the wedding. They are rewriting the agreement. Cornelia barely looked at Odile this morning. I did not ruin anything, Mom, I said. Do not give me that. You planned this. You bought that hotel knowing that Odile would. I did not plan anything, I said. I bought the hotel because it was a good building. Odile chose to have her party there. Odile chose to put my name on a blacklist. You chose to stand in the lobby and smile while a stranger turned me away at the door. I kept my voice level. I just existed. That is all I did. I existed, in a place you did not expect me to be able to afford. Silence on the line. You should have told us, she finally said. We are your family. Family asks, Mom, I said. Family includes. Family does not put you on a list with instructions to route you through the kitchen. More silence. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her searching for the answer that would put her back in charge of the story. I did not know you were successful, she said at last, quietly. You never asked, I said. Not once in 9 years. Every conversation was Odile, every holiday, every call. And the few times I tried to tell you something about my own life, you changed the subject before I finished the sentence. That is not, she said, and stopped. I am not angry, I said, and I meant it, which surprised me even as I said it. I am just done. Done shrinking. Done hoping you will finally look up and see me. When you are ready to have an honest conversation about why you treated your 2 daughters like they belonged to different families, I will be here. But I will be here as an equal, Mom, not as an afterthought you call when the important daughter needs something. And I hung up before she could answer, and my hands were shaking, but my voice had held steady the whole way through, and that, I decided, was enough. 2 weeks later, the news reached me through Raphael, the way most family news reached me now. The wedding is still happening, he said, but they have moved it. The Calderwoods did not want to hold it at the Halcyon after all. Too many memories, I suppose. Too many reminders of the night they learned their future daughter-in-law was not quite who she had claimed to be. I was in my office at a new property, a converted cotton warehouse in the arts district that I was turning into a boutique hotel, plans spread across my desk, a contractor waiting downstairs. The prenup, I asked. Significantly revised, he said. Odile gets no access to the family's assets, unless the marriage lasts at least 8 years, and even then it is limited and conditional. I thought about my sister, who had built her whole self around landing the right man, finally holding the ring and discovering that the vault behind it had been quietly bolted shut. What about my mother? I asked. No word directly, he said, and then he hesitated. But a letter came to the hotel this morning, addressed to you. I had Lionel forward it. The envelope arrived within the hour. My mother's handwriting, careful and precise, the penmanship of a woman who had always taken pride in doing things correctly, whatever that had come to mean. Inside was a single page. Cecily, it read. I do not fully understand why you had to do what you did. Part of me still believes you enjoyed embarrassing us, but another part of me knows I have not been fair to you for a very long time. I am trying to understand why, and it is not easy, and I am not ready to talk yet. But I wanted you to know that I am thinking about it, Mom, and it was not an apology. Not really. But it was the first time in my entire life my mother had put on paper the words I have not been fair to you, and after 34 years, that was not nothing. I did not write back right away. I put the letter in my desk drawer, and I went back to my plant, and I let her sit with the not being ready, the way I had sat with it my whole life. Here is what I want you to understand about how it ended, because this is the part the world usually gets wrong. There was no tearful reunion. No scene on a porch where everyone wept and everything was forgiven and we became the family we never were. That is not how these things go, and if someone promises you it is, they are selling you something. What happened instead was smaller and truer. My mother started calling once a month. The conversations were short and awkward, full of silences neither of us knew how to fill. But she was trying, in the only clumsy language she had. Last week she asked me about the new property, the warehouse in the arts district. It was the first time in my life she had ever asked me an unprompted question about my work. We are keeping the original brick, I told her, and restoring the old freight windows. We should open in the fall. That sounds, she said, and there was a pause I could hear her working through. That sounds lovely, Cecily. Not praise, exactly, but acknowledgement. And after a lifetime of standing behind glass, acknowledgement felt like weather changing. I set boundaries, and I kept them. When my mother slipped back into the old habit of comparing, of steering, of managing me, I ended the call, gently, and tried again the next month. She is learning slowly that the version of me who absorbed all of that in silence does not live here anymore. Boundaries, I have come to think, are not walls. They are doors with better locks, and you get to decide who has a key. Odile and I do not speak. Weston sent me an email a week before their wedding, which I was not invited to and did not expect to be. Cecily, it read, I want to apologize for how things went at the party. I heard what Odile said to you that night, about the entrance, about the dress, and I said nothing, and I have thought about that a great deal since. Staying quiet felt neutral in the moment. It was not neutral. I am sorry. For what it is worth, what you have built is remarkable, and my mother brings it up at least once a week. I hope, someday, you and Odile can find your way to something. Weston. I did not reply, but I saved it because it was the only honest thing anyone from that night ever said to me, and because he had understood the thing my whole family never had. Silence, when you watch a person be diminished, is not neutral. It is a vote. It just pretends not to be. Spring came early that year. I signed the papers on my 5th property in March, a rambling historic inn in the Blue Ridge foothills, not far, as it happens, from where I had bought that first 12-room place 9 years before. Full circle, in a way. We booked 7 events at the Halcyon for the first quarter alone, and one of them, I have to laugh even now, was for a woman who had stood in that ballroom and watched the whole thing unfold, and decided on the spot that I was exactly the kind of person she wanted to do business with. Strange, how things turn. I think about that night more than I expected to. Not the confrontation itself. That memory is sharp but already fading, like a photograph left too long in the sun. What I think about is the moment just before it, the moment I decided not to hide. For 9 years, I had built my life in silence, not out of shame, but because I had learned early that my achievements did not register with the people whose opinion I had been raised to chase. They had already decided who I was. Nothing I did was going to move that verdict. So I stopped submitting evidence. I built in the dark, for myself, and I made my peace with the dark. The reveal at the party was never really about proving them wrong. It was not about revenge, or humiliation, or even justice. It was about one thing only. It was about refusing, finally, to be invisible in my own life. And that, I think, is the lesson it took me 34 years to learn. You can spend your whole existence auditioning for people who walked out of the theater before the curtain ever rose, shrinking to fit the seat they assigned you, hoping that if you are just successful enough, just good enough, just enough, they will finally look up from their program and see you. Or you can stop. You can put down the script. You can walk out of their theater and build one of your own and fill it with people who actually came to watch. No one else ever gets to decide whether you are worth looking at. That was always, only, your call to make. I do not hate them, my mother, my sister, the family that spent 3 decades looking straight through me. I simply no longer need them to see me, because I finally do. And that turned out to be the only pair of eyes that was ever going to matter. My grandmother Clementine was right, the way she was right about most things. Real things do not shout, they just last. I spent so long trying to make myself loud enough to be noticed. It turned out the answer was never to get louder. It was to get quieter and truer, and to build something so solid that one day the room would go silent on its own, and everyone in it would finally turn to look at what had been standing there the whole time. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, if you have ever walked into a room full of the people who are supposed to love you and felt like a ghost at your own life, I want you to hear this before you go. Your worth was never theirs to hand out, and it is not theirs to withhold. Stop waiting at a window they were never going to open. Build your own door, put a good lock on it, and walk through it as yourself. out loud, unhidden, on the night of your own choosing. If this is the kind of story that finds you when you need it, follow along and stay with me, because I have more of them coming, and I would like you here when they do.